Hi, everyone. Welcome to a deep dive into the community eligibility provision hosted by the Food Research and Action Center. I'm Steve Hayward, Communications Manager at FRAC. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few brief housekeeping items. We expect this webinar to run about 45 minutes. We are recording the presentation and will send the recording and slides to everyone who registered in a follow-up email. Closed captioning is available. To turn captions on, select Show Captions in the bottom taskbar and choose English as the spoken language. We'll have time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. To ask a question at any time during the webinar, please use the Q&A tab in the bottom taskbar. With that, I'll pass it off to Erin Kennedy Heisem, Senior Child Nutrition Policy Analyst at FRAC. Take it away, Erin.
Thanks, Steve, and welcome everyone to FRAC's Thursday webinar, a deep dive into the community eligibility provision. I'm so excited to be joined with our partners at USDA today to really go through all the regulations and new participation data for CEP. So let's get started. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with FRAC, we are a leading national nonprofit organization who is dedicated to eradicating poverty-related hunger in the United States through advancing bold and equitable policy solutions that strengthen and expand the federal nutrition assistance programs. Next slide, please. We have a lot to dive into today with some great speakers. So we're going to kick it off with just sharing some brief participation data about the community eligibility provision. And then I'm going to pass it over to Elizabeth Infan and Courtney Haruska, program analysts at USDA Food and Nutrition Service in the School Meals Policy Division. We'll each share resources from USDA and FRAC, talk about some advocacy initiatives that FRAC is supporting, and of course, we'll leave some time for audience Q&A. As Steve mentioned, please use the Q&A function on the bottom taskbar of your screen to enter questions at any time throughout the webinar. Next slide, please. So FRAC tracks CEP participation data every year, looking at annual adoption rates across the country. I am currently in the process of collecting, scrubbing, and analyzing participation data for this year. So the graph that you're looking at on your screen looks at CEP adoption from school year 14-15 through last year. Keep in mind that last year, the ISP, or the Identified Student Percentage, that allowed a school or group of schools to be eligible to participate was at 40%, right? So different than what we'll hear from our partners later on in the presentation. But we've seen tremendous growth in community eligibility over the last decade, really looking at that change from the 21-22 school year to the 22-23 school year. And we know a lot of this growth can be attributed to the fact that schools did not want to return to that tiered traditional system of free, reduced price, and paid once those pandemic era waivers were no longer available. Next slide, please. So another way to look at participation data for last year, about 6,400 school districts participated, over 40,000 schools, reaching nearly 20 million students. And again, that was 82% of eligible schools at that 40% eligibility level. Next slide, please. Another great resource or initiative that we want to talk about is the Medicaid Direct Certification Demonstration Pilot Project. So USDA recently announced the 5 new states who were approved to participate in Medicaid Direct Certification for next school year. So huge congratulations to Idaho, Maine, New Jersey, North Dakota, and Rhode Island for joining the other 38 states in matching on Medicaid. Medicaid Direct Certification is a game changer for community eligibility. It helps ensure that eligible children have access to free school meals while reducing the administrative burden on schools and easing and reducing or eliminating the application burden on families. Schools or states that have adopted Medicaid Direct Certification have seen that CEP becomes more financially viable for schools and districts within their state. And we mention this because USDA is accepting applications to participate for the 25-26 school year. So if you are located in the 7 states or the District of Columbia that is not currently performing direct certification using Medicaid data, please reach out and we'll be happy to help and see how we can get your state to apply. Next slide, please. I just want to touch on this quote about Medicaid direct certification from Lena Wilson in Texas. She says the Medicaid project in Texas was first implemented in October 2017. From 2017 to 2020, using Medicaid information, the number of students directly certified increased by 48%, reducing the paperwork burden on schools with 376,000 fewer household applications to approve statewide. I think you'll hear numerous positive benefits of Medicaid direct certification. And again, if you are in the handful of states that are not currently doing this and you are interested in learning more, please reach out. I'm happy to talk about it until you're ready to apply. Next slide, please. All right. At this point, I'm very excited to turn it over to Elizabeth and Courtney at USDA. Take it away, ladies.
Hello, thank you for joining us in this discussion regarding CEP. My name is Courtney Horishko. My colleague Elizabeth Infong and I are both program analysts in USDA's Child Nutrition Program's School Meals Policy Division. We are pleased to provide you with this deep dive look into CEP today. Today, we'll provide an overview of CEP, which will include information on its background, benefits, and eligibility. Then we will review CEP timelines, which will include an overview of notification and publication requirements and election deadlines. We will wrap up with a rundown of FNS's CEP resources that can help LEAs before, during, and after implementation. I think we can go to the next slide. Thank you. CEP is one of 4 special provision options that offer an alternative way of operating USDA's school meal programs. Special provisions were created to help decrease the administrative and household burden of completing and processing school meal applications. CEP allows districts and schools to operate the National School Lunch Program, NSLP, and School Breakfast Program, SBP, based on characteristics of the community. Rather than collecting school meal applications to make individual student eligibility determinations, schools that adopt CEP are reimbursed based on the percentage of students who qualify for free meals without an application. Next slide. We will begin with a little background of the community eligibility provision. CEP was established by Congress as part of the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act of 2010 to improve access to school meal programs by allowing schools located in high poverty areas to offer breakfast and lunch at no cost to all enrolled students without the need to process or collect individual meal applications. Starting in school year 2011 through 2012, CEP was phased in among a small group of states over a few years. CEP became available to schools nationwide in school year 2014, 2015. Most recently, in school year 2022, 2023, over 19 million students attended over 40,000 schools that participate in CEP across the U.S. That's 82% of eligible schools participating in CEP. Next slide, please. There are many benefits to adopting CEP for students, households, and schools. For students in CEP schools, they are able to receive a breakfast and lunch every day at no cost, which helps to reduce any stigma attached to receiving a free meal. As a result, participation in the NSLP and SBP has shown an increase in CEP schools, estimated at around 7% in NSLP and 12% in SBP. For households, they do not have to complete household applications for school meals or worry about keeping enough money in their child's school meal accounts. They simply send their children off to school knowing they will have an opportunity to eat a healthy breakfast and lunch. And finally, for schools, we have already mentioned the administrative burden relieved by not having to process applications. But meal service operations can also be streamlined since CEP schools do not have to count meals by the free, reduced price, and paid categories at the point of service. Just as households benefit from not having to pay for meals, schools benefit since CEP eliminates any unpaid meal charges, which you know is a very stressful and challenging issue for schools to manage. Lastly, even for state agencies, CEP creates a streamlined review process during the administrative review because there are no applications to review. Next slide, please. CEP allows high-need school districts, groups of schools, and individual schools participating in the NSLP and NSBP to offer meals at no cost to all enrolled students for up to 4 years at a time. Eligibility for the provision is based on the percentage of identified students, which we will discuss in depth shortly. At the end At the end of the 4-year cycle, schools must reestablish their eligibility to continue operating CEP. Those that no longer meet the eligibility threshold but are within a certain range can continue to operate CEP for an additional year or 5th year called the grace year. School districts that want to elect CEP must notify their state agency by June 30th of the prior school year. Next slide, please. The primary eligibility criteria for CEP is that the school district, group of schools, or individual school must have an identified student percentage of at least 25% as of April 1st of the school year prior to CEP implementation. The identified student percentage, or ISP, is calculated based on the number of identified students and the number of enrolled students. Identified students are children who are directly certified or categorically eligible for free meals because they participate in the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, SNAP, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, TANF, Food Distribution Program on Indian Reservations, FDPIR, and in some states, as already indicated earlier, Medicaid, or their status as homeless, runaway, migrant, or foster child, or Head Start enrollee. By taking advantage of income data collected by other federal assistance programs, it removes the burden of schools to check income again. As a reminder, only children who are directly certified for free meals with Medicaid can be included in the number of identified students. An enrolled student is a student enrolled in and attending schools participating in CEP. Enrolled students must have access to at least one meal service, breakfast or lunch daily, to be included in the ISP. Next slide, please. Now, we will show you how the ISP is calculated. The ISP is calculated by dividing the number of identified students, the numerator, by the number of students enrolled, the denominator, and multiplying that figure by 100. In our example on this slide, there are 230 identified students and a total of 420 enrolled students. We divide 230 by 420 and round to 4 decimal places for 0.5476. After that, we multiply 0.5476 by 100 to get an ISP of 54.76%. This school's ISP is well above 25%, so they are eligible to participate in CEP. One important note is that the LAs cannot round up to meet the minimum ISP. For example, an ISP of 24.98% does not meet the minimum threshold of 25% to elect CEP. Next slide, please. As mentioned earlier, school districts, groups of schools, and individual schools may elect CEP, and we refer to this as grouping. Grouping allows multiple schools to participate as a single CEP group and claim meals using a shared ISP calculated using identified and enrolled student data from all schools in the CEP group. Grouping can bring in schools with lower ISPs. It can also help avoid parent confusion. For example, grouping schools that feed into each other may make sense, so parents are confused by having to pay for a child at one school and having another child getting free meals at a different school. And electing district-wide, if feasible, offers the most operational efficiencies. Next slide, please. On this slide, you can see an example for how to calculate the ISP for a group by taking the sum of all the identified students for the entire group of schools divided by the sum of the total student enrollment for the entire group of schools. Once you have those numbers, the ISP calculation is the same that we walked through before. You divide identified students by enrolled students, round to 4 decimal places, multiply by 100 to get a percentage, and the final ISP for this group is 55.71%. School 2 with an ISP of 24% would not be able to participate in CEP alone because the ISP doesn't meet the minimum 25%, but School 2 can participate in CEP as part of the CEP group because the group's ISP is at least 25%. School districts have discretion to group schools however it works best for them. Next slide, please. The ISP is important not only for eligibility, but it also forms the basis of claiming federal reimbursement. To determine the percentage of meals claimed at the federal free rate, the ISP is multiplied by a factor of 1.6. That factor is referred to as the multiplier. The multiplier provides an estimate of the total number of students eligible for free or reduced price meals in CEP schools. By law, the multiplier can be between 1.3 and 1.6. FNS codified the highest possible multiplier, 1.6, in regulations. The remaining percentage of meals are reimbursed at the federal paid rate. CEP schools do not claim any reduced price meals. Now, let's walk through 2 claiming percentage examples, which will also show the range of claiming percentages under CEP. In our first example here, the school meets the minimum ISP with an ISP of 25%. So we take 25 and multiply it by the 1.6 multiplier to calculate that 40% of meals that will be claimed at the federal free rate and the remaining meals, 60%, are claimed at the federal paid rate. In the next example, the school has an ISP of 62.5. So we take 62.5 and multiply it by the 1.6 multiplier to calculate that 100% of meals are reimbursed at the federal free rate. So an identified student percentage of at least 62.5 means that all meals are reimbursed at the federal free rate. Thank you very much, and now I'll turn it over to Elizabeth, who will begin on financial viability.
Thank you, Courtney, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am Elizabeth Imfong, and we will continue on with financial viability. As shown by the examples on the previous slide, there is a wide range in the federal reimbursement received under CEP. Therefore, prior to participating in CEP, LEAs are strongly encouraged to assess their ability to provide meals at no cost to students and cover operating costs with federal assistance and any other available funds, including state and/or local funds. This is also what we mean by the federal-local cost-sharing model in CEP. As we mentioned earlier, we understand that increasing the multiplier would ensure financial viability for more LEAs, but USDA does not have the authority to increase the multiplier beyond the 1.6. That can only be done by congressional action. And lastly, our estimator tool can help prospective LEAs estimate the level of federal reimbursement received under CEP and compare that to the reimbursement that would be received under standard counting and claiming. You can find the estimator tool on the USDA FNS website shown on this slide. Next slide, please. And now we will discuss funding sources available to support CEP implementation. As you know, the primary purpose of the nonprofit school food service account is to operate or improve a school meal program serving nutritious meals. And operating CEP meets that purpose and is therefore an allowable cost of the nonprofit school food service account. Funds in that account include federal reimbursement and other assistance provided under the National School Lunch Act and the Child Nutrition Act, including unused reimbursement from the Summer Food Service and Child and Adult Care food programs. Another example of funds in the account could be non-program revenue that is in excess of revenue required to meet program requirements. While funds in the nonprofit school food service account may be used to support CEP, LEAs should also ensure that using them to support CEP does not adversely impact the financial viability, overall sustainability, or quality of the school meals programs. If there is a difference between the cost of serving school meals at no cost and the funding available, LEAs must pay that difference with non-federal funding sources. Sources of non-federal funds include any portion of state revenue matching funds that exceeds the minimum requirement, state and/or local funds, cash donations, and in-kind contribution funds from outside sources, such as volunteer services, for example. Next slide, please. As we talked about earlier, not collecting applications has significant benefits for households and schools. However, LEAs considering CEP should understand the potential impact of not accepting school meal applications. Many states and LEAs have historically used school meal application data as a poverty measure for other educational funding. For example, for Title I funding, state education funding programs, or exam fee reductions or waivers. While many states have figured out how to overcome challenges associated with the lack of data from applications, this is still an important factor to consider when electing CEP. Specifically, for Title I, the Department of Education has guidance to help LEAs participating in CEP understand the available options for data sources to use instead of school meal applications. For this information, please visit the CEP Resource Center listed on this slide. Lastly, some LEAs use alternate income forms to collect data otherwise collected by school meal applications. FNS cannot limit or prohibit the use of such alternate measures of income, but it must be clear that the receipt of free school meals is not contingent on completion of the alternate income form. Next slide, please. All right, now we will review the annual timeline and deadline requirements for CEP. LEAs operating CEP are required to conduct a data match between the SNAP and student enrollment records at least once annually. This allows LEAs to take advantage of increases in ISP during a CEP cycle and allows LEAs to plan to adjust in upcoming school years if the ISP is trending down. For example, if an LEA participating district-wide in the third year of a CEP cycle finds its district-wide ISP has decreased, then the LEA could begin looking into different grouping options for higher need schools and switch from a district-wide to a group election at the end of the current CEP cycle. FNS recommends timing a data match to coincide with April 1st. While direct certification matches may occur more than once per year, data reflective of April 1st must be used to determine the ISP, so at least one data match must occur around this date if the data will be used for CEP. Using the phrase "as of," as noted on the slide, ensures identified student data generally reflects April 1st, but can also accommodate variation in state direct certification systems. For example, if a state conducts direct certification monthly on the 5th of each month, the state may use data from April 5th to generate the ISP. Next slide, please. Next, we will discuss the annual notification requirements, starting with the requirements for state agencies. For each school year, by April 15th, state agencies must notify LEAs of their district-wide eligibility for CEP and provide the procedures for interested and eligible LEAs to participate. The state agency must notify eligible districts, near eligible districts, districts eligible for a grace year, and currently participating districts. As a reminder, eligible LEAs in schools have an ISP of 25% or greater and near eligible LEAs in schools have an ISP between 15 and 25%. State agencies must also inform eligible LEAs of how to elect CEP and provide guidance on the process. State agencies may use proxy data to fulfill notification and publication requirements, but proxy data may only be used for notifying LEAs. It may not be used to elect CEP. Next slide, please. Similar to the state agency notification requirement, by April 15th of each school year, LEAs must provide school-level eligibility information to their respective states. The notification must include eligible schools, near eligible schools, schools eligible for a grace year, and currently participating schools. States and LEAs may share the required information prior to the April 15th deadline. State agencies with access to school-level eligibility information may exempt LEAs from this requirement. And as with the district-wide notification, proxy data may be used to fulfill the school-level requirement, but may not be used as the basis for a school's ISP. Next slide, please. The next key date is May 1st. By this date, each school year, state agencies must post lists of eligible and near eligible LEAs in schools on their respective state agency websites. State agencies are required to maintain eligibility lists on their website until the following May 1st, when new eligibility lists are published. States must also provide FNS the link to these lists by May 1st. The information posted on the FNS website, along with a map that links to state-specific information where interested stakeholders can learn more. And next slide, please. And finally, by June 30th, LEAs must notify their state agency of their intent to elect CEP. If electing CEP, the LEA must submit ISP data representative of April 1st, no later than June 30th. All of the information and deadlines I just mentioned are captured in our recently published memo, CEP Statutory Annual Notification and Publication Requirements in school year 2024 through 2025 election deadlines, which you can find by going to the CEP Resource Center at the link shown here. And next slide. Okay, now we will take a moment to highlight a few resources available to you. We recently published several CEP memos in a CEP fact sheet. The manual and Q&As were updated based on the final rule, the current stage of CEP implementation, and to add clarifications to existing policy. As I just mentioned, we also published the annual reminder for CEP notification, publication, and election deadlines. We also updated the memo that includes guidance for state agency procedures to ensure the accuracy of the ISP. There were no changes to the procedures. This memo was mainly just updated to reflect the 25% minimum threshold. Lastly, we have an updated CEP fact sheet that is now available on our website. Next slide, please. All of the resources I just mentioned have been posted to the CEP Resource Center, and a recording of the webinar will be posted as soon as possible. The CEP Resource Center also features the CEP Estimator tool, other guidance, and data. The QR code on this slide will take you to the CEP Resource Center. The FNS School Programs Policy page includes all of the NSLP policy memos and other guidance materials. This is a great place to go to find up-to-date policy on the school meals programs. And lastly, if you need information on program contacts, please refer to the state agency resource website shown on this slide. And I just wanted to clarify that a recording of this webinar has been posted on the FNS website. And that is it for me, and I will turn it over to Erin. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth and Courtney. I know that is a lot of information for those of you who might be new to CEP or just getting into it. The key message there at the end is that all of this information is available on the website, and we are here to help you, so reach out. We also at FRAC have a community eligibility website. You can see it right here on your screen. Next slide, please. At FRAC, we look at the community eligibility provision as one of three main pathways to healthy school meals for all. We advocate at the state and national level so that all students in all schools have access to nutrition that they need to learn and thrive at no charge. And we see the community eligibility provision as one step closer to healthy school meals for all. Next slide, please. There are a lot of federal legislation right now that's being proposed that we are supporting that we wanted to make you aware of. We did have a comment come through in the Q&A. I'm going to just take a moment to address it now, talking about the CEP multiplier, right? With the reduction in eligibility to participate in CEP going from 40% to 25%, the question asked if USDA will increase the multiplier, making it more financially viable for schools at lower eligibility thresholds. And unfortunately, that is not within USDA's power. The difference between law and regulation is what makes that nuance or gives USDA the power for that multiplier. USDA is not able to increase costs to the child nutrition programs. Increasing the multiplier would increase costs to the child nutrition programs, and that needs to occur through an act of Congress. So I want to highlight some of the bills that are really looking to support not just CEP, but universal school meals. So the Universal School Meals Program Act would do just that, create a nationwide Healthy School Meals for All program. The School Meals Expansion Act is really that bill that person who asked that question is looking for. It increases federal funding for community eligibility, thus making it more viable, financially viable to schools and districts that don't have outside support. So it would increase that multiplier from 1.6 to 2.5. No Hungry Kids in School Act creates a statewide community eligibility option, so allowing for grouping across LEAs. And then the Expanding Access to School Meals Act would increase eligibility for free school meals to 200% of the poverty line, expand direct certification, and thus support community eligibility. Next slide, please. This is a QR code. You can also see the link on your screen. It allows you to very quickly and easily write a letter to your representative requesting that they co-sponsor the Universal School Meals Program Act. So if you are like me and you believe that every child in this country should have access to universal school meals, I encourage you to visit that site, enter your information, and contact your representative. Encourage them to co-sponsor the bill if they haven't already. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, FRAC has a website with a ton of community eligibility resources, including a variety of research that I addressed earlier on the presentation, our database where you can look up and see which schools are participating in your area, as well as links to how to increase your direct certification rates, how to operate community eligibility at lower ISPs, how to apply for Medicaid direct certification demonstration project. With that, I will turn it over for Q&A. Again, if you have any questions, please enter them in the chat at the bottom of the screen. So I will say I'm going to open it up to ask USDA to come back and join me. There was a comment that came through the chat asking about reapplying. So the district participates in CEP. They are in the second year. They haven't received any information about a new application for an extension. So I wanted to kick that to USDA to bring it to the larger group.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Fry. I work with Courtney and Elizabeth in the School Meals Policy Division. So for that question, we had just responded basically saying like any communication about applying for CEP for the upcoming school year will come from your state agency. So I'm sure you would be hearing from them soon. And if not, I'm sure you could always reach out to them and ask them your questions.
Yeah, we always like to say go to your state agency first, but as Courtney and Elizabeth shared, when you adopt CEP, it is a 4-year cycle, so you can lock in and do it for 4 years without having to reapply. However, as a school district, if you have the capacity to constantly be looking at your numbers, then you can reassess, well, if I reapply this year, does that increase the amount of federal reimbursement? Meaning, did my identified student percentage increase? And is it time for me to maybe recommit to another 4-year cycle. So once you're in CEP, you're in for 4 years, but reach out to your state agency. I also wanted to touch a little bit about the importance of grouping. So I know Elizabeth and Courtney talked about grouping a little bit. Michelle or Heather, do you have any kind of insight to elaborate on what grouping is and how beneficial that could be?
Well, one of the I'm Heather Hopwood. I work in the school meals policy division with Michelle and Elizabeth and Courtney. One thing that can be advantageous about grouping is it can allow school districts to bring in schools who might not be individually eligible to participate in CEP as part of a group, as long as the group's ISP meets the minimum 25% threshold, then the group claims with a shared identified student percentage. So we encourage school districts to look at different ways that they can group their schools. We have an estimator tool on the CEP Resource Center that was shared on the slides that can help school districts kind of look at different groups. I know some states have tools too to help school districts optimize grouping, but it is just a flexibility of CEP that lets school districts decide how they want to implement CEP depending on the makeup of their school district.
Thanks, Heather. I agree 100%. And I look at grouping as it's this really powerful tool within community eligibility that I sometimes am concerned it doesn't get enough focus on, because as Heather mentioned, it allows maybe schools that are not eligible on their own to come into the program. But directors, food service directors, can get really creative with how they create groups within their district to maximize federal reimbursement. So you don't have to go district-wide as one single group. You can have every school in your district participate in CEP under a variety of different groupings that makes the most sense to bring in federal reimbursement rates based on your identified student percentages and then the enrollments of each schools. And so like Heather mentioned, there's resources in USDA. We also have a grouping tool at FRAC that's available. And again, happy to answer any questions about that offline after the webinar if anyone has questions. All right, I think that is all the questions that we have. So humongous thank you to Heather, Michelle, Elizabeth, and Courtney for joining us today out of your busy schedules, all of USDA for helping us work together in partnership. Thank you to everyone who joined us today on our webinar, and we will hear from you soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Erin.